Imagine an army of children, not soldiers, not warriors, marching barefoot across medieval Europe, singing God's name as they walk toward their deaths. That is not a legend. It happened, or at least, something close enough to truth that it still chills the heart 8 centuries later. It was the year 1212, a time when faith and fear ruled every corner of Europe. The Crusades had raged for more than 100 years, endless holy wars fought for control of Jerusalem. Kings, knights, and priests had all gone to the east in the name of God, and most had returned with nothing but scars and empty hands. And then, out of the silence of exhaustion, came a voice. Not from a pope or a priest, but from a child. In the small French village of Cloyes, near Vendôme, a boy no older than 12 named Stephen tended his father's sheep in the rolling fields. He was a quiet boy, poor, devout, often seen praying alone. But one day, he claimed something extraordinary, that Christ himself had appeared to him, disguised as a pilgrim, and had given him a letter for the King of France. Stephen said that God had chosen him to lead a new crusade, not of men or weapons, but of innocence. Children, he declared, would succeed where armies had failed. Their purity would melt Muslim hearts, and the sea itself would open for them as it had for Moses. It sounded impossible, and that's exactly why people believed. The church was divided, the nobles weary, the peasants hungry for hope. When Stephen stood before the altar in the village square, his voice breaking with passion, crowds gathered. They said he glowed in the sunlight. They said the sick were healed when he prayed. Whether any of it was true no longer mattered. The story had taken root. Within days, hundreds of children began arriving from neighboring villages. They carried crude wooden crosses and sang hymns as they walked. Some were no more than 7 years old. Some brought their younger siblings. A few priests followed them, claiming to guide their souls. Others watched in awe or horror as this strange, holy madness spread across the land. By midsummer, the Children's Crusade had become a movement too large to contain. In the towns of Chartres, Tours, and Orleans, farmers and merchants stood aside to let the endless columns of children pass. Their clothes were torn, their feet bled, but their faith burned like wildfire. They believed the sea would part before them, that angels would lead them across to Jerusalem. Many parents wept as their sons and daughters left. Some tried to stop them, locking doors, pleading with priests. But what could they do? The church itself was split. Some monks called it divine, others called it madness. Stephen's words had become gospel among the poor. Christ calls us, and no harm shall come to us, they shouted. But harm came quickly. The road south through France was long and merciless. Summer heat beat down on their bare heads. Villages they passed through could not feed them all. Bread ran out. Water turned foul. Those too young to continue were left behind, sometimes dead, sometimes carried in carts by others until the carts broke down. Still they marched. Witnesses spoke of the sight. Thousands of ragged children singing as they crossed the plains, banners made of torn linen fluttering in the wind. To some, it looked like the dawn of a miracle. To others, it looked like the prelude to disaster. And disaster was indeed waiting. In Germany, news of the French boy Stephen reached another child, Nicholas of Cologne, who also claimed divine inspiration. Soon, a second wave of thousands began marching south toward Italy, chanting the same promise, that the seas would open for them. Europe was now echoing with children's voices, two crusades moving separately, but driven by the same impossible dream. They crossed rivers, mountains, and borders. They begged for food in towns that could barely feed themselves. Many were turned away, mocked, or beaten by local guards. Some priests tried to lead them home, only to be drowned out by the chanting and the hymns that never seemed to end. They were children marching into history and into tragedy. By the time Stephen's Crusaders reached Marseille, they were skeletal and exhausted. The coastline stretched before them like a promise, a glittering blue expanse that shimmered under the hot August sun. They fell to their knees, singing, praying, waiting. The sea was supposed to open. The waters were supposed to part, revealing the path to Jerusalem. But the sea remained silent. Hours passed, then days. Nothing happened. Rain began to fall, soaking their banners, washing away the dust and tears from their faces. Some refused to believe the miracle had failed. They waded through storms, praying harder. Others began to realize the truth. They had been led by faith into nothingness. And yet, even then, hope refused to die. Two merchants came to them, Hugh the Iron and William of Pasquier, offering ships. They said they would carry the children to the Holy Land for free, out of love for God. Exhausted and desperate, Stephen and his followers rejoiced. 7 ships were loaded with hundreds of boys and girls, their songs rising once more as the vessels drifted out into the Mediterranean. The remaining children waited on the shore, certain their friends were on their way to Jerusalem. But those ships never arrived. The sea stretched empty beneath the gray sky. A storm gathered on the horizon. Somewhere far out beyond sight, the wind howled, and the first of the 7 ships began to break apart. Back on the shore, the children huddled together in the rain, staring at the ocean that refused to open. Their faith was unbroken, but their strength was gone. And as thunder rolled across the waves, they began to realize something terrible. No one was coming to save them. The miracle they'd been promised was never real. In the distance, the sea churned black under lightning, and the silhouettes of ships disappeared one by one. And there, standing at the edge of the water, soaked to the bone, Stephen of Cloyes stared at the horizon, his small hands gripping a cross made of driftwood, his lips moving in silent prayer. Behind him, thousands of children shivered in the cold rain, their songs fading into sobs. The sea did not part. It only swallowed their hope. And by morning, the coastline of Marseille was empty. The first great crusade of children had vanished into legend. When the sun rose over the Mediterranean coast, it found only silence. The beaches of Marseille were littered with the footprints of thousands who had vanished into the night. Some had boarded ships. Others had wandered inland, searching for food, for answers, for God. The ships that carried those children never reached the Holy Land. 2 were wrecked in a violent storm off the coast of Sardinia, their splintered hulls and broken masts washing ashore days later. Hundreds drowned, nameless, uncounted, swallowed by the sea they believed would part for them. The remaining 5 ships vanished completely. Months later, whispers began to spread, whispers darker than any storm. The 2 merchants who had promised safe passage, Hugh the Iron and William of Pasquier, were not men of faith, but men of greed. They had sold the surviving children into slavery on the markets of North Africa. The army of innocents had been betrayed not by war, but by human cruelty. Back in France, Stephen of Cloyes was gone. Some said he died on the journey home. Others claimed he was executed by order of King Philip II, embarrassed by the madness that had gripped his kingdom. No one really knew. But even as the first crusade of children faded into tragedy, another was already marching, hundreds of miles to the north. In Germany, a boy named Nicholas of Cologne had heard of Stephen's vision and claimed to have seen one himself. He was only 12, but he spoke with the same burning conviction. God has called us to free the Holy Land. The sea will open for us. This second wave was even larger. By late summer of 1212, as many as 7,000 children and teenagers, shepherds, apprentices, even a few nuns, gathered beneath the German sun. Some priests joined them. Others tried to stop them, crying that it was the devil, not God, who called. But faith is louder than reason. And so, they marched. They moved through the Rhine Valley, then across the Alps, their feet bleeding on jagged stones. Villagers threw them scraps of bread. Others turned them away, terrified by the ghostly sight of so many starving children. Many froze to death in the mountain passes. Others were swept away by rivers. Yet Nicholas pressed on, his voice hoarse, his eyes sunken but burning with faith. To the end, he believed they were walking toward a miracle. By the time they reached Genoa, fewer than half remained. There, on the Italian coast, they gathered once more to pray for the sea to open. The same miracle that had failed Stephen's followers would surely happen for them. It had to. But again, the waters stayed still. The citizens of Genoa watched in pity and disbelief as the ragged children camped along the docks, singing hymns through the night. Some local families took pity and adopted them. Others drifted away, trying to make their way back home. A few followed rumors that the Pope himself wished to see them in Rome, hoping for divine recognition. They walked the long road south, hungry, barefoot, barely alive. When they finally arrived at the papal court, Pope Innocent III did not bless them. He did not call them saints or heroes. Instead, he wept. He told them gently that their faith was pure, But their mission had been misguided that the Holy Land was not theirs to reclaim. He urged them to return home. But for many, there was no home to return to. Their families believed them dead. Their villages had forgotten them. The miracle was over. What followed was silence, a silence that spread across Europe like a shadow. The children who survived were scattered, broken, or enslaved. The church tried to erase the shame. Chroniclers argued for centuries whether it had truly happened or whether it was only a fable born from hysteria. But in the quiet records of monasteries, buried between accounts of plagues and wars, there are names, real names of children who left home and never came back. Years later, rumors surfaced that a few of the kidnapped children had escaped from North Africa and returned to Europe. One told of markets in Alexandria, where pale-skinned boys and girls were sold to noblemen as servants. Another spoke of survivors forced to work in ships and vineyards, dreaming of the land they had never seen, Jerusalem, the holy city that had called to them through the lies of men. Those who survived carried the story like a scar. They had walked halfway across the known world for faith, only to learn that faith alone cannot move oceans. In time, the children's crusade became less of a story about religion and more a story about innocence. How easily it could be manipulated. How quickly it could be destroyed. It was not an army, it was a procession of belief, pure and unguarded, devoured by the world's cruelty. No songs or banners greeted their return. No monuments were built in their honor. The church buried the story in silence. But in the villages of France and Germany, mothers told their children never to trust miracles that demanded blood. And yet, the legend refused to die. For centuries, poets and painters resurrected the image. Endless lines of barefoot children, walking beneath a burning sky, holding hands as they vanished into the horizon. Some said they were martyrs. Others said they were fools. But the truth lies somewhere between, in that fragile space where faith meets desperation. No trumpets sounded for them. No victories were won. Only the sound of small footsteps fading down the roads of Europe, swallowed by time. They called it a crusade. But history remembers it as something else entirely, a pilgrimage of ghosts. If you enjoyed this story, please encourage this channel by subscribing. And also do well to check out other amazing stories on this channel. Thank you.